A billionaire CEO sits in his luxury car, thinking he controls everything, until a 9-year-old black boy yells at him to shut up. What happens next will change his life, and the world forever. The late afternoon sun reflected off the polished chrome and sleek curves of the black luxury sedan as Ethan Caldwell approached, phone in hand, his mind still buzzing from the last executive meeting. He had built his empire with relentless ambition, precision, and a belief that control was everything. To the world, Ethan was untouchable. A billionaire CEO whose name alone commanded respect, whose presence seemed to fill every room before he even entered. Every deal he signed, every acquisition he orchestrated, was a testament to a life built on strategy, intellect, and calculated risk. He opened the door of his car with practiced ease, nodding to the driver who had grown accustomed to his taciturn nature. Ethan settled into the seat, briefcase on his lap, the faint scent of leather and success surrounding him. Outside, the city thrummed with life. Children laughing as they played, vendors calling out their wares, traffic weaving its endless, chaotic dance. Yet Ethan's mind remained anchored in contracts, profits, and projections, largely oblivious to the world moving just beyond the tinted windows of his world. As the driver started the engine, and the car began to glide smoothly through the streets, a sudden voice pierced the bubble of control Ethan had meticulously maintained. "Shut up!" the voice commanded, sharp, unapologetic, and undeniably human. Ethan froze, his hands still poised on the briefcase. The words, so small and yet so striking, came from the sidewalk, where a young black boy, no older than 9, stood with a defiance in his eyes that seemed impossible for someone so young. His fists were clenched at his sides, his gaze unwavering as it met Ethan's. For a moment, Ethan was rendered speechless, an unfamiliar emotion settling over him. Confusion tinged with irritation. He had faced difficult board members, aggressive competitors, even hostile crowds, but never had a child dared to speak to him with such unflinching boldness. "Excuse me?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled but tinged with incredulity. The boy did not back down. "I said shut up," he repeated, his voice stronger now, a rhythm of defiance born not from disrespect but from necessity. There was a fire in him, a raw clarity that demanded to be acknowledged. And then, almost as if sensing Ethan's confusion, the boy's expression softened slightly, his voice shifting from challenge to explanation. "You don't listen," he said simply. "You never listen. You think money makes you better, but you don't see what's really happening." Ethan felt a strange tightness in his chest, a mixture of discomfort and curiosity. The boy's words, though delivered in anger, carried a weight that could not be ignored. There was a truth in them, raw and unpolished, that no contract, no boardroom strategy could ever encapsulate. And in that moment, Ethan realized that this encounter, brief, sudden, and entirely unexpected, might be a lesson more profound than anything he had learned in a lifetime of accumulation and power. The traffic around the car seemed to fade. The horns, the chatter, the hum of engines, all became background noise to the intense presence of the boy on the curb. Ethan leaned slightly forward, lowering his briefcase. "And what exactly do you want me to hear?" he asked cautiously, his voice losing a fraction of its usual authority. The boy's gaze sharpened again, unwavering. "I want you to see us," he said, "to hear us, to understand that we are here, and we are living, and it's not easy. You walk past people like me every day, and you don't notice. You don't care. But we see you, and we see how you make life harder for us without even trying." Ethan's mind raced. He had been taught to negotiate, to analyze, to quantify every interaction as an asset or liability. And yet here was a child 9 years old, cutting through all pretense with nothing but honesty and courage. There was no strategy, no manipulation, no hidden agenda, only truth. A truth that was both confronting and illuminating. The car slowed to a halt. Ethan's driver looked at him expectantly, unsure of whether to wait or move on. But Ethan did not move. He could not. The boy's words had broken through the polished exterior, forcing him into a reflection he had long avoided. He saw, for the first time in many years, the lives that existed beyond his towers, beyond his offices, beyond his carefully controlled bubble. He saw the struggles, the pain, the resilience, and the courage that existed in people whom the world often ignored. Why do you speak like this?" Ethan asked finally, his voice softer now, tinged with genuine curiosity and a growing awareness. The boy's answer came without hesitation. "Because someone has to," he said. "If we don't speak, who will? People like you, with all your money and power, don't always notice when we are suffering. We have to be loud. We have to be brave. Even if we're small, even if no one listens at first." There was a pause, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. Ethan's hands, previously clenched around his briefcase, relaxed. For the first time, he felt the stirring of something beyond profit, beyond influence, something profoundly human. He felt the stirrings of humility, empathy, and responsibility. And in that moment, he understood that this child, standing firmly on the cracked sidewalk, had given him a gift that no boardroom, no acquisition, and no sum of money could ever offer: perspective. The boy looked at Ethan one last time, his eyes steady and unwavering. "Remember us," he said. "Remember that we are real, that our lives matter, that our voices matter. And if you don't, then nothing you do will ever be enough." Ethan nodded slowly, words failing him. The boy turned and walked away, disappearing into the evening crowd, leaving Ethan alone with the echo of truth, courage, and challenge. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of responsibility not as a burden, but as a calling that demanded he see, hear, and act. And as the car resumed its journey, Ethan Caldwell realized that his life, no matter how meticulously built, had been missing a vital element. Understanding the lives of those who the world often overlooked, the power of listening, and the courage it takes to speak truth, no matter your age, status, or size. Ethan sat back in the car, the soft hum of the engine filling the silence. Yet the boy's words reverberated in his mind with relentless clarity. Each syllable seemed to weigh heavier than the briefcase on his lap. Each pause between thoughts a mirror reflecting his own blind spots. He had always measured success in numbers, acquisitions, and market influence, but this moment challenged every metric he had ever valued. Here was a child 9 years old, challenging him in a way no board member, shareholder, or advisor ever had. He could not shake the boy's piercing stare or the conviction that had radiated from such a small frame. The audacity of the child's courage unsettled him, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths. Ethan realized that his achievements, though remarkable by conventional standards, were insulated from the struggles of real lives. Lives shaped by inequality, neglect, and systemic injustice. And now, for the first time, he was forced to consider a world beyond his skyscrapers, his private jets, and his carefully curated image of control. By the time he arrived at his office, Ethan's mind had begun a transformation that no strategy session could have initiated. He walked through the familiar corridors, past colleagues who greeted him with routine politeness, past assistants who anticipated his every need, and yet his thoughts remained fixed on that boy. He wanted to know more. Who was he? What circumstances forced such clarity at such a young age? And how could Ethan use the resources he commanded to make a tangible difference? Ethan spent the rest of the evening in deep reflection. He pored over reports and analytics, not for the first time, but this time through a lens tinted by empathy rather than ambition. Every statistic on education, healthcare, and economic disparity now carried faces, stories, and voices. He saw the invisible lines that divided privilege from struggle, wealth from want, and opportunity from limitation. And he understood that his power, His influence and his resources could no longer exist solely for accumulation. They could serve a greater purpose. The next morning, Ethan returned to the street where he had encountered the boy. The city was waking up, vibrant and relentless, but Ethan's eyes were searching for a single figure. The boy who had spoken truth into the life of a man who rarely listened. Hours passed, and he wandered through the crowded sidewalks, asking discreet questions, seeking anyone who might guide him to the child. Storekeepers, neighbors, even street vendors offered vague gestures, none revealing the boy's identity. Frustration mounted, yet Ethan's resolve only deepened. This was not a fleeting curiosity. It was a calling. Finally, a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, pointed toward a narrow alleyway. "You're looking for Malik," she said gently. "He's different from other kids. He'll tell you exactly what you need to hear." Ethan thanked her, his heart pounding. As he approached the alley, he caught sight of the boy again. Malik, as he had learned. The boy was alone, scribbling notes into a worn notebook, his expression serious yet serene. Ethan cleared his throat softly. Malik looked up, recognition flickering in his eyes, but he did not smile. Instead, he studied Ethan carefully, assessing whether this figure of authority had come to patronize, to lecture, or to genuinely understand. "You came back," Malik said, voice calm but guarded. "Why?" Ethan inhaled slowly, aware that every word now mattered. "Because I realized something important," he began, choosing his words with care. "You spoke truth to me yesterday, and it shook me. I've spent my life measuring success by power and money, but I now understand that real success is different. It's about listening. It's about seeing people for who they truly are, and acting to make life better for those who don't have a voice." Malik's gaze softened slightly, though his caution remained. "Do you really mean that?" he asked. "Because most grown-ups say things, but they don't do them." Ethan nodded, sincerity evident in his posture and tone. "I mean it," he said. "But I can't just talk. I have to act. I need your help, Malik. I want to understand what's really happening, what people like you face every day, and I want to do something about it." The boy considered him, silence stretching, a silent measure of authenticity that could not be faked. Finally, he nodded once sharply. "Okay," he said, "but you have to promise to listen, not just talk. And you have to promise to actually care, not just do it for show." Ethan extended his hand. "I promise," he said. Malik shook it, firm and resolute, the contact bridging a gap that wealth, power, and social distance had previously made impossible. In the days that followed, Ethan immersed himself in Malik's world. He walked the neighborhoods, attended local community centers, and listened to children and families whose voices had long been ignored. He saw the challenges: overcrowded schools, lack of resources, discrimination, and daily struggles that statistics could never fully convey. And through it all, Malik remained his guide, explaining with clarity and honesty, demanding accountability and action. Ethan began to make changes within his own corporation, using influence and resources to support educational programs, mentorship opportunities, and initiatives that empowered young people. He invested not as a benefactor seeking recognition, but as a man awakened to responsibility, moved by the courage of a child who refused to remain silent. But even as progress was made, challenges persisted. Some colleagues questioned his new focus, seeing it as a distraction from profit and growth. Others doubted Malik's influence, unable to comprehend the impact a single child could have on a billionaire. Yet Ethan remained steadfast, buoyed by the clarity that Malik's courage had inspired. A reminder that leadership was not measured solely in financial success, but in empathy, courage, and the ability to stand for justice. Malik, for his part, remained vigilant, sharp, and unyielding. He continued to challenge assumptions, not only Ethan's but those of the broader community, teaching a lesson that was as uncomfortable as it was necessary. Change required honesty, confrontation, and the courage to speak truth to power, no matter how small the speaker might be. Through these early days of engagement, Ethan realized a profound truth. Sometimes, the most powerful voices come from the most unexpected places. A 9-year-old child, armed with conviction and integrity, had forced him to see the world differently, and in doing so, had offered the possibility of real, lasting transformation. Weeks turned into months, and Ethan Caldwell's life began to transform in ways that no boardroom or executive report could have predicted. The encounter with Malik had shattered the polished barrier of his isolation, replacing it with a newfound awareness of the lives beyond his luxury, influence, and power. He had begun to see the faces behind the statistics, the human stories behind the numbers, and the resilience that existed even in the most overlooked corners of society. Ethan's first initiative was subtle but meaningful. He established community partnerships aimed at providing educational resources, mentorship programs, and safe spaces for children like Malik. Instead of announcing these projects with press releases or public fanfare, he focused on listening to community leaders, teachers, and families, ensuring that the programs were not top-down solutions imposed by wealth, but genuine efforts shaped by those they aimed to serve. Malik was there every step of the way, guiding Ethan, pointing out blind spots, and reminding him that true impact required more than money. It required accountability, empathy, and consistency. Not everyone welcomed Ethan's transformation. Within his company, colleagues whispered behind closed doors, questioning the billionaire's priorities. "Why is he so focused on social programs?" they asked each other. "We are here to make money, not play savior." Board meetings became tense, with some executives openly challenging his decisions, arguing that philanthropy distracted from growth and profitability. Yet Ethan remained unmoved. He understood that his purpose had shifted, not away from leadership or success, but toward a more holistic definition of it. Leadership that recognized responsibility, humanity, and justice as inseparable from achievement. The community, however, responded with cautious hope. Malik's influence was undeniable. Even adults who had long been skeptical of outsiders began to notice Ethan's commitment. He didn't simply donate funds or hold speeches. He showed up day after day, listening, learning, and acting. He helped fund after-school programs, supported local initiatives to improve infrastructure, and invested in educational technology for children who had never had access to such resources. Slowly, walls that had divided privilege from struggle began to crumble, replaced by mutual respect and shared vision. Despite these changes, Ethan knew that his journey was only beginning. The real test of transformation lay not in projects, programs, or media attention, but in challenging deeply ingrained systems of inequality. He started to engage with policymakers, advocating for changes in educational access and youth empowerment initiatives. Malik's voice accompanied him in meetings through notes, stories, and personal accounts of children and families whose lives had been shaped by systemic neglect. The child's insights were sharp, unfiltered, and often uncomfortable for the adults who had grown accustomed to politeness and pretense. One evening, Ethan and Malik stood together at the entrance of a new community center they had helped establish. The center was modest, yet vibrant, a place where children could learn, play, and be seen. Malik's eyes scanned the room, noting the small library, the computer stations, and the murals painted by local artists. "You did a lot," Malik said quietly, almost to himself. "But it's not enough yet." Ethan nodded, understanding that Malik's words were not criticism, but a call to continued action. "I know," he said, "and I won't stop. Not now. Not ever. You've shown me what it means to really see people, to hear them, and to act. I won't forget that lesson." Malik smiled faintly, a rare softness breaking through his usual seriousness. "Good," he said, "because if people like you don't use their power for good, then nothing changes." We need voices like yours, but they have to be honest, brave, persistent. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Ethan's shoulders, but it was no longer a burden. It was a calling. He began to use his platform in larger ways, speaking publicly about the importance of listening to marginalized voices and addressing inequality. His speeches were different now, no longer solely focused on business achievements, but on the human stories that inspired change. Investors and partners began to see a new kind of leadership emerge, one rooted not only in financial acumen, but in integrity, courage, and social responsibility. Malik continued to challenge Ethan in subtle but profound ways. He reminded him that progress was never linear, that setbacks were inevitable, and that listening required patience as well as action. Yet the boy's courage inspired everyone around him, showing adults that even the smallest voice could have extraordinary power if it spoke truth with conviction. Children in the community began to emulate Malik's boldness, finding confidence in the knowledge that their experiences and voices mattered. As the months passed, Ethan noticed a personal transformation that went beyond his professional achievements. He became more reflective, more patient, and more empathetic in all areas of life. The lessons Malik imparted were no longer abstract. They had become a framework for living, guiding him to treat every interaction, every decision, and every relationship with deeper awareness and care. And then came a day that Ethan had not anticipated. A day when the child's courage would ripple far beyond the local streets, capturing the attention of a wider audience. Malik had been invited to speak at a citywide youth conference, and Ethan accompanied him, proud yet apprehensive. Malik stepped onto the stage, a 9-year-old boy in worn sneakers, and addressed an audience that included policymakers, educators, and community leaders. He spoke with clarity, honesty, and unwavering confidence about inequality, about the challenges children faced, and about the courage required to demand justice. He told stories that adults often ignored, articulated frustrations that had been silenced for too long, and delivered a call to action that was impossible to dismiss. Ethan watched from the wings, heart swelling with admiration, knowing that this boy, small in size but immense in impact, was challenging the world to rise to its better self. By the time Malik finished, the room was silent for a moment, then erupted in applause, some hesitant, some inspired, all acknowledging the truth of what they had heard. Ethan joined the applause, tears forming unbidden. He realized that the boy's courage had not only changed him, but had begun to shift an entire community's consciousness, planting seeds of hope, pride, and determination. Ethan Caldwell knew, as he stood there beside Malik, that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long, fraught with obstacles, doubt, and resistance, but the foundation had been laid. A foundation built on courage, integrity, and the belief that every voice matters, no matter how small it may seem. Months passed, yet the echoes of Malik's voice continued to resonate through Ethan Caldwell's life. What had begun as a brief encounter on a sunlit sidewalk had blossomed into a movement of awareness, courage, and transformation. Ethan's empire, once defined solely by profit and power, was now reshaped by purpose, accountability, and the stories of lives that had long been overlooked. But the journey was far from complete. True change required persistence, humility, and the courage to confront deeply rooted inequities. Ethan and Malik stood together at the inauguration of a new youth empowerment center, a culmination of months of planning, listening, and acting. Children poured into the building, their laughter and excitement filling the halls, echoing against walls that were now vibrant with murals depicting community strength, resilience, and hope. Malik's presence, unwavering and assured, reminded everyone that even the smallest voices could wield extraordinary influence. As Ethan addressed the gathered crowd, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. "I have spent my life building businesses, negotiating deals, and creating wealth," he began, his voice steady and resonant. But today I realize that wealth is meaningless if it does not serve humanity. True power lies not in money, but in understanding, listening, and taking action to uplift those whose voices are too often ignored. The audience listened intently, many nodding in recognition, others moved to tears. Malik stood beside him, a silent yet commanding presence, embodying the courage and dignity that had inspired this transformation. Ethan continued, "And I have learned this lesson from someone many of you know, a child whose honesty, bravery, and clarity forced me to see the world differently. Malik showed me that courage is not measured by age, wealth, or status. It is measured by the willingness to speak truth, even when the world tries to silence you." Malik stepped forward, his small frame commanding attention, and addressed the crowd with confidence and poise beyond his years. "We cannot wait for someone else to notice us," he said. "We must speak, act, and demand that our lives matter. Every child, every family, every person deserves to be seen, heard, and treated with dignity. Change is possible, but only if we are brave enough to speak and persistent enough to act." The room erupted in applause, a wave of acknowledgement and solidarity sweeping through every corner. For many, it was a revelation that a child, a voice once ignored on a city sidewalk, could challenge an entire community to reflect, to act, and to strive for justice. For Ethan, it was the culmination of a personal journey that had begun with discomfort, curiosity, and the courage to listen. In the weeks that followed, the impact of their work spread beyond the local community. Other organizations, inspired by Ethan and Malik's partnership, began to prioritize youth voices, equity, and inclusion. Policies were proposed, programs expanded, and opportunities created for countless children who had previously been invisible to those with the power to help. The movement was no longer just Ethan's project or Malik's cause. It had become a shared mission, a ripple of change extending outward, challenging systems, and inspiring courage in every age and stage of life. Ethan often reflected privately on the journey, on the boy who had dared to speak with unflinching honesty. He thought of the first words, "Shut up," not as a challenge or insult, but as a wake-up call, a mirror held up to the indifference he had carried for so long. Malik had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths, to question assumptions, and to recognize that influence without empathy was hollow. One evening, after another day spent visiting programs, speaking with children, and strategizing with community leaders, Ethan and Malik sat together quietly on a bench overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered against the fading light, a symbol of achievement, but now also a reminder of responsibility. Malik broke the silence first. "Do you think people will really listen?" he asked, gaze fixed on the horizon. Ethan looked at him, eyes reflecting gratitude, pride, and humility. "Some will, some won't," he said. "But it doesn't matter. What matters is that we speak, that we act, and that we refuse to ignore injustice. Your courage has shown me that one voice, if honest and brave, can ignite change far beyond what we imagine." Malik smiled faintly, satisfaction mingled with the resolve that had defined him from the start. "Good," he said, "because we have work to do." As the sun disappeared behind the towering buildings, casting long shadows over the streets below, Ethan realized that this was more than a lesson in social responsibility or philanthropy. It was a lesson in humanity, about dignity, justice, and the transformative power of listening. Malik's courage had created ripples that extended far beyond a single interaction, reminding Ethan and the world that true leadership required humility, empathy, and the willingness to confront one's own blind spots. Months turned into years, and the legacy of that encounter continued to grow. Programs flourished, children thrived, and communities once overlooked began to be heard. Malik's voice remained central, guiding decisions, inspiring action, and proving that courage knows no age. Ethan, once defined by his wealth and authority, became known for something far greater: a leader willing to change, to listen, and to elevate those who had long been silenced. In the end, the moment that began with a simple, defiant command on a city sidewalk, "Shut up," became a turning point not just for Ethan Caldwell, but for countless lives that had long awaited recognition. It was a testament to the power of truth, the resilience of the human spirit, and the extraordinary impact of those who dare to speak, even when the world tries to ignore them. Ethan never forgot Malik's words, that courage, clarity, and conviction can change the world if wielded with honesty and heart. And Malik, the boy who had dared to challenge a billionaire, continued to inspire every action, every decision, and every effort to build a world where every voice mattered. Every life was seen, and every story, no matter how small, could ignite profound change. As the nights settled over the city, Ethan Caldwell finally understood that wealth, power, and influence were meaningless without humanity, justice, and dignity at their core. And the boy who had told him to shut up had paradoxically taught him how to truly listen, to truly act, and to truly lead. If this story touched your heart, then don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel, because every click helps us bring more powerful stories of courage, justice, and truth to the world. Join us, and let's raise our voices together.